Hey, welcome back to the Ready State. Today I want to just deconstruct a little bit of the way we think about this valgus twitch, the knees coming in at the bottom position of the squat. Now look, we've seen it happen a lot. It may be like rounding. The issue for us is it's probably safe in 99% of the times, but what we want to appreciate is that, hey, we just don't think it's an effective technique to generate the most force, to jump as high, and more importantly, what we're trying to always do is practice shapes. We're trying to practice movements, practice positions. So if I always just throw it away as, hey, it always happens when it gets loaded, or it gets heavy, or I just not a big deal because I may not get injured because the research doesn't support that, that's an issue because practice doesn't make perfect, practice makes permanent. So one of the things that we know is that when the leg, and fortunately we're in a post 90 degree, post it's okay to squat society. You can squat deeper than 90. I think we finally buried that old beast. But when the the knee is in this compressed position, it's actually very stable. I can handle massive, massive loads, and the system is so stable that moving back and forth really isn't a problem. So this isn't really a knee issue in this position because the knee is so mechanically stable down here. It doesn't matter, right? I'm just closed off, like it just doesn't matter. When I stand up, then it starts to matter. My knee starts to have a higher degree of range of motion, higher degree of freedom. So one of the things that we can do immediately to help protect our young athletes, and especially we know that jumping and landing with the foot turned out is a mechanism and a well-documented mechanism of ACL injury. One of the ways that we can protect our people is to have them jump and land with the feet straight. Now this is something shouldn't be controversial because we're into athletic movement. Now if your only sport is squatting up and down and you don't really care, knock yourself out. And certainly we have ranges of motion where we can squat up and down and turn our feet out and do what we need to do. And I'm not talking about just Olympic lifting. I'm talking about I use jumping and landing or lifting to train for a sport. So if my athletes are training to run with their feet straight or cycle with their feet straight, I certainly don't want to practice them defaulting to positions that they've trained so that I have kind of these fighting or these sort of dissonant systems, sort of pattern interference problems developing. So one of the ideas is we are always working on jumping and landing with the feet straight, and one of the reasons is it actually limits how much valgus force is actually available to the system. When the foot turns out, all of a sudden we see a higher degree and total motion of that collapse or the window of opportunity as that knee has opened up and moved away from this stable, more mechanically stable position when it's straight, right? This foot straight versus twisting the tibia out on the femur in this bottom position. This gives me a lot higher degree of motion where I can pick up a lot of momentum and not be able to potentially control that. With the foot straight, I have a much smaller window. Now, a couple other things are notable here because we tend to think that this knee coming in problem is always a strength problem. Why? Well, we do a lot of monster walks in a lot of high positions. But as we've talked about before, that monster walk is usually done with feet straight. You will never see people walk across the gym with their feet turned out. And the reason is that as you're monster walking with your legs turned out, you can't create a lot of rotation externally, knees out, to maintain the isometric of the hip, which is theoretically what we're purporting to be the weakness problem. So I'm putting my monster walk, I'm doing my monster walks to try to make my hips strong, but I'm squatting in a position which I didn't train in. And again, as you put that monster walk around your band around your legs and walk, chances are you are doing it with feet straight. Now, if you come and sit down, you've got the range here, right? Don't worry about your back, but you can test your position here in this end range. Shove your knees out. If I'm trying to control the knee, that's one of my goals, then I want to be choosing positions that potentially give me better access to that potential strength. So if I'm in this position and I'm trying to fight myself, I'm very strong through my hip rotation here. I can push and measure that force with a hand dynamometer. If I turn my feet out, because this is the only position I can squat in, And that's valid. We're gonna have to squat all the way down sometimes. But what you're gonna see is that you cannot create the same amount of force through that rotation. That isometric is not available to you to help stabilize that. So if you're jumping and landing with your feet out, that's a problem. Now it's important to appreciate this other issue, is that in a foot straighted position, I can maintain integrity across the ball of the foot and the heel, right? And notice I've got an arch and my ankle's in the middle of my foot here. With the foot turned out, notice that if I sit all the way down, whoop, I've got this collapse happening through the foot, and it's not an accident then. If I took this forward and just made it forward, my knee is already inside my foot. So in order to maintain this or solve this problem, I've got to get the whole system up and over the foot to maintain the arch, which is a mechanical impossibility. I've gotten to this bottom position, I'm under load, there's no way I can shove out into that position. But what ends up happening then is that remember that the default away when I fire and I'm stiff in the hip is to try to create this position of compensation to buy this slack. So one of the things that we see then is instead of being able to bounce forward or bounce off the bottom, we're actually left with no more forwardness. I can't actually go any forward. My ankles are locked at their end range. And the only way I can create any fascial spring is to create a knee valgus twitch. So instead of sitting in the bottom position and being able to use the hips and hamstrings to do what I need to do in this bottom shape, I'm left with the only option I can. And notice I'm doing the same motion, but my knees are coming inwards. Same motion but that's the only option. So knees have to come in as a mechanism of being able to create that fascial spring so I can stand back up. The problem is, as I have taught myself in this position, now I'm reinforcing this mechanic. So when I'm looking to create a spring or have hamstring control, my tendency is now to be able to use this shape, and this shape with this leg open is not very strong and not very stable and potentially susceptible to those phantom ACL injuries. So one of the things that we're talking about here is that if I'm trying to make sure that my athletes are protected, I'm going to have them be foot straight forward, but also I'm going to hammer on that ankle position. They may not go ass to grass, they may not ever have access to that, and certainly my back is rounded here. But understand, what's the compensation? If I'm missing my ankle range of motion, where does my knee go? Inside. Is it going to be able to track any further forward? No, it's not. The only motion left to it is this medial motion. So we see this valgus force as being related, highly related to potentially don't have any hip motion, pull that aside. Foot is turned out, weakened hip position, lost the ability to create isometrics, and more importantly, can't fix the ankle, or the ankle is driving this position. So if this is my collapse, maybe that valgus knee twitch is all about foot turned out and missing ankle range of motion as big components to that incomplete position.